The contract her father signed was written in blood. And now Victoria Bennett stood at the iron gates of the city's most dangerous secret, a vampire-owned nightclub called Elysium, that existed 3 stories beneath the streets of Manhattan, where humans went to forget and never returned the same. She clutched the folded paper in her trembling hands, the one that had arrived at her apartment 2 days after her father's funeral, stamped with a crimson seal that looked disturbingly organic. The message had been simple. James Bennett's debt of $200,000 was now hers to pay, and payment was due immediately. Report to Elysium before midnight on the 3rd day, or enforcement measures would begin. She didn't know what enforcement measures meant in the vampire world, but the cold certainty in those typed words made her skin crawl. Victoria had spent those 2 days trying to find another way. She'd gone to banks, called distant relatives, even considered fleeing the city entirely. But everywhere she turned, doors closed. Her father had burned every bridge, exhausted every favor, and left her with nothing but his mistakes. And when she'd researched Elysium online, she'd found almost nothing, just whispered rumors on obscure forums about a place where the city's elite went to indulge in pleasures that couldn't exist in daylight, run by creatures that shouldn't exist at all. The bouncer at the gate was human, but his eyes held the flat awareness of someone who'd seen too much. He looked at her paper without touching it, then nodded toward a descending staircase that seemed to drop into darkness itself. "All the way down," he said. "Don't stop on the 2nd level. You're expected on 3. Victoria's heels clicked against stone as she descended, the sound echoing in the narrow shaft. The 1st level she passed was all red lighting and pulsing music, bodies writhing against each other in ways that made her look away. The 2nd level was quieter, more intimate, with private rooms behind frosted glass where she could see silhouettes that moved with inhuman grace. But she kept walking down, 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 until the air itself changed, grew colder, heavier, tinged with something ancient and electric. The 3rd level opened into a space that stole her breath. It wasn't a nightclub at all, it was a court. Marble floors stretched beneath vaulted ceilings painted with frescoes that depicted scenes of terrible beauty. Pale figures with crimson eyes feasting beneath starlight, kingdoms that existed in shadow, wars fought with fang and claw. Chandeliers dripping with black crystals cast everything in a dim, flickering glow that seemed to move with its own life. And scattered throughout the space, on velvet furniture that looked older than America itself, were the vampires. They were exactly as the stories described and somehow worse. Impossibly pale skin that seemed to glow in the darkness, hair white as bone or silver as moonlight, eyes that ranged from scarlet to gold to colors she had no names for. They dressed in a mixture of modern elegance and old-world finery, tailored suits that cost more than her yearly rent, dresses that looked like they belonged in European ballrooms from centuries past. And they moved with a predatory grace that made every gesture look choreographed, every glance deliberate and weighted. Several turned to look at her as she entered, and Victoria felt their attention like pressure against her skin. She forced herself to keep walking, to head toward the massive throne at the far end of the room where a figure sat in shadow. "Victoria Bennett," a voice called out, and it wrapped around her name like silk and steel combined. "We've been expecting you." He stood, and the shadows seemed to retreat from him reluctantly. Victoria's first thought was that he looked like a fallen angel, if angels could be carved from ice and cruelty. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with the kind of build that suggested strength held in perfect control. His hair was white silver, falling to his shoulders in a way that should have looked soft but instead seemed sharp as blades. His skin was pale as marble, flawless and cold, and his eyes were the color of fresh blood, bright and burning in a face that was beautiful in the way that dangerous things were beautiful, compelling and terrifying at once. He wore a black suit that probably cost more than her father's entire debt, tailored perfectly to his frame, with a deep crimson shirt beneath that matched his eyes. Rings adorned his fingers, old silver and older stones, and when he moved down the steps of his throne toward her, every vampire in the room seemed to hold their breath. "I am Raziel Drăculești," he said, and his accent was something ancient and Eastern European, the kind that spoke of castles in the Carpathian Mountains and nights that lasted for months. "King of the New York territory, lord of the underground courts, and the creature to whom your father sold his daughter." "He didn't." Victoria started, but her voice cracked. She swallowed and tried again. "He didn't tell me. I didn't know about any of this until he died. Ignorance doesn't dissolve debt." Raziel stopped 3 feet from her, close enough that she could see the inhuman stillness of his chest. He wasn't breathing. "Your father came to me 6 months ago, desperate for money to pay off gambling debts that would have gotten him killed. I gave him $200,000 in exchange for a very specific form of collateral. He gestured, and another vampire appeared at his side, a woman with white hair braided in an intricate crown, wearing a dress that looked medieval. She handed Raziel a scroll of old parchment, and he unrolled it before Victoria's eyes. The contract was written in what looked like a mixture of Latin and English, the ink a rusty brown that she realized with horror was probably blood. Most of it was legal language she couldn't parse, but certain phrases jumped out at her. Bound service, period of 7 years, body and blood, surrender of autonomy. He sold me, Victoria whispered, the words tasting like ash. He actually sold me into slavery. Not slavery, Raziel corrected, though his tone held no comfort. In censured servitude, there's a legal distinction, even in our world. You would work in my establishments, serve in my court, and provide blood when needed, though never enough to harm you permanently. After 7 years, the debt would be cleared and you would be free to go. 7 years, Victoria felt the room spin slightly. 7 years of being property, of being trapped in this underground world of monsters who looked at her like she was food or entertainment or both. 7 years of her life, stolen by her father's selfishness. What if I refuse, she asked, though she already knew the answer. Raziel's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those blood-red eyes, not quite sympathy, but maybe recognition. Then the contract has provisions for enforcement. We would take what we're owed by force. Your blood to start, then your will. We have ways of making humans compliant, Miss Bennett. Ancient ways, rooted in the magic that made us what we are. You would still serve for 7 years, but you would do so without your mind intact, a doll who moves when we pull the strings. A few of the other vampires in the room laughed at that, soft and cruel. Victoria felt tears burning at the corners of her eyes but refused to let them fall. She wouldn't give these creatures the satisfaction of seeing her break. When do I start? She asked instead, lifting her chin. For the first time, something like surprise crossed Raziel's features. He studied her for a long moment, his head tilting slightly in a gesture that was distinctly inhuman. You're not going to beg? He asked. Not going to cry or offer me something else in exchange? Most humans presented with this situation fall to pieces. Would it change anything? Victoria met his eyes, even though every instinct screamed at her to look away from that predatory gaze. No, he admitted, but it would be entertaining. Then I won't waste your time or mine. Her hands were shaking, so she clasped them behind her back. Just tell me what you want me to do. Raziel continued to stare at her, and Victoria had the unsettling sense that he was seeing through her bravado to the terror underneath, reading her like a book written in a language only he knew. Then, without warning, he reached out and took the contract from the vampire woman's hands, and tore it in half. The sound was shockingly loud in the sudden silence. Every vampire in the room went rigid, several of them making sounds of protest or confusion. The woman beside Raziel hissed something in a language Victoria didn't recognize, but he ignored her, tearing the parchment again and again until it was nothing but pieces that he let flutter to the marble floor. What are you doing? Victoria breathed, not understanding. Raziel looked at the scattered fragments, then back at her. I'm nullifying your father's contract, he said simply. You owe me nothing, you're free to go, my lord. The vampire woman stepped forward, her eyes flashing with something dangerous. That contract was witnessed and sealed. You cannot simply destroy it because a human girl refuses to cry. I am king here, Celine, Raziel said, and his voice dropped to something that made the air itself vibrate with power. I can do whatever I wish. The contract is void. Victoria Bennett is released from all obligation. Victoria couldn't process what was happening. She looked at the torn pieces of parchment, at the vampire king who had just destroyed a legally binding magical contract for no reason she could understand, at the crowd of immortal creatures who were staring at their leader like he'd lost his mind. I don't understand, she said. Why would you? Because your father was a coward who sold his daughter to save his own skin, Raziel interrupted, and there was something cold and final in his tone. And I find I have no interest in owning someone who was betrayed so thoroughly by the person who should have protected her. Consider it a moment of uncharacteristic mercy. He turned away from her, moving back toward his throne, clearly considering the matter closed. But Victoria felt something hot and sharp flare in her chest, not gratitude but anger. No, she said. Raziel paused mid-step. Around the room, several vampires made sounds of disbelief. No one said no to the vampire king. No, he repeated, turning back to look at her with those burning red eyes. The debt is still real, Victoria said, her voice gaining strength. My father took your money. That money is gone. He spent it before he died, and I can't pay you back. Just because you destroyed the contract doesn't mean the debt disappears. That's not how honor works. You're lecturing me about honor? Raziel's lips curved into something that might have been amusement or might have been threat. A human, barely 25 years old, is trying to teach a vampire who has lived for 8 centuries about honor. I'm saying that I won't be dismissed like a charity case. Victoria shot back, taking a step toward him even though every survival instinct told her to run. You gave my father money in good faith. The fact that he lied and betrayed me doesn't change the fact that your debt is real. So if you won't hold me to his contract, then let me make a new one. Let me work off what he owed, but on my terms. The silence that followed was absolute. Victoria could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears like drums. She had no idea where this boldness was coming from. Maybe it was grief or anger at her father, or the simple fact that she had nothing left to lose, but she meant every word. Raziel moved so fast she didn't see it, and suddenly he was right in front of her, close enough that she could feel the unnatural cold radiating from his body. He looked down at her with an expression she couldn't read. You're either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid, he said softly. I just gave you your freedom and you're throwing it back in my face. I'm trying to do the right thing, Victoria said, forcing herself not to back away. Something my father never bothered with. For a long moment, Raziel said nothing. Then, to her shock, he laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his face from merely beautiful to something that made her heart skip for entirely different reasons. Very well, Victoria Bennett, he said. You want to pay off your father's debt on your own terms then? Here are mine. You'll work in Elysium, but not as a servant. You'll be my personal assistant. You'll handle my human business dealings, manage the club's interactions with the mortal world, and serve as a liaison between my court and the city above. You'll live here in the underground in quarters I'll provide, and you will not offer your blood to anyone, under any circumstances, unless you choose to do so freely. Does that sound acceptable? Victoria blinked. That was actually reasonable, suspiciously reasonable. What's the catch? The catch is that you'll be surrounded by vampires every day, creatures who will see you as prey or temptation or both. The catch is that you'll be living in my world, by my rules, and if you break them there will be consequences. And the catch is that you will belong to my household under my protection, which means that every vampire in this city will know you are mine to defend. His eyes burned into hers. That last part is not negotiable. If you work for me, you are under my protection, and anyone who touches you without your permission will answer to me personally. Something about the way he said mine sent a shiver down Victoria's spine that wasn't entirely from a fear. How long? She asked. How long until the debt is paid? 2 years, Raziel said. I'll consider the work you do worth 100,000 a year. That's more than fair for someone with no experience in our world. It was more than fair, it was generous, which made Victoria even more suspicious. But looking at Raziel's face, at the way he watched her with something that might have been curiosity or might have been challenge, she found herself nodding. Okay, she said. 2 years, I'll do it. Then we have an agreement. Raziel extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Victoria took it. His skin was cold as marble, and the moment their palms touched, she felt something like electricity arc between them, not painful, but definitely not natural. Raziel's eyes widened slightly, and she knew he'd felt it too. But he said nothing, just held her hand for a moment longer than necessary before releasing it. Celine, he said, not looking away from Victoria. Show Miss Bennett to the guest quarters in the East Wing. Have her things brought from her apartment. And summon Lucian. I'll need him to begin her education on our laws and customs tomorrow evening. The vampire woman Celine looked like she wanted to argue, but she simply nodded stiffly and gestured for Victoria to follow. As Victoria turned to leave, she glanced back once and found Raziel still watching her, his expression unreadable and his eyes burning like coals in the darkness. She had no idea what she'd just agreed to. But as she followed Celine deeper into the underground palace, past rooms filled with wonders and horrors in equal measure, Victoria felt something she hadn't felt since her father died. Purpose. The guest quarters turned out to be a suite of rooms that were larger and more luxurious than her entire apartment had been. The walls were covered in dark wallpaper that looked hand-painted with scenes of moonlit forests. The furniture was all antique wood and velvet upholstery, and the bed was easily king-sized, with posts carved into the shapes of twisted trees. There was a bathroom with a clawfoot tub, a sitting room with a fireplace that burned with blue flames, and even a small library filled with books that ranged from modern bestsellers to leather-bound tomes that looked centuries old. The king is being remarkably generous, Celine said as she showed Victoria around, her tone making it clear she didn't approve. These rooms are usually reserved for visiting vampire nobility. Why do you think he's doing this? Victoria asked. running her fingers along the spine of a book that was labeled in what looked like German. Celine's lips pressed into a thin line. I have no idea, and that concerns me greatly. Raziel has ruled this territory for 300 years, and in that time, I've never seen him show mercy to a human debtor. He enforces contracts ruthlessly. It's how he maintains order. For him to destroy yours, then create a new arrangement that's actually favorable to you. She shook her head. Either he's playing a game I don't understand, or you've somehow intrigued him. I'm not sure which possibility is more dangerous for you. Victoria turned to face the vampire woman fully. Celine was beautiful in the way all vampires seem to be, with sharp features and an ageless quality that made it impossible to guess how old she really was. But there was also something calculating in her golden eyes, an intelligence that Victoria instinctively respected. Are you trying to warn me? Victoria asked. I'm trying to help you survive, Celine corrected. Raziel is not cruel, but he is not human, and he has not been human for a very long time. He thinks differently than you do, values different things, and his affection, if that's what this is, can be as dangerous as his anger. Vampires are possessive creatures, Miss Bennett. If he's decided you belong to his household, he will defend you with the full force of his power. But that protection comes with a cage, whether you see the bars yet or not. Before Victoria could respond, there was a knock at the door. Celine opened it to reveal two human servants carrying Victoria's belongings, the few boxes of clothes and personal items from her apartment, looking pathetic and shabby in this elegant space. That was fast, Victoria murmured. We're efficient, Celine said. You'll find that vampire society runs on different rules than the human world. We don't waste time with bureaucracy or delays. When the king gives an order, it's executed immediately. She moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing, Miss Bennett, you'll need to adjust your schedule. We're nocturnal, obviously. The court wakes at sunset and retires at dawn. I suggest you try to do the same, or you'll find yourself very alone during your waking hours. After Celine left, Victoria spent the rest of the night, or what remained of it, unpacking her things and trying to process everything that had happened. She kept expecting to wake up, to discover this was some kind of grief-induced nightmare. But the cold reality of the underground palace, the silk sheets on her bed, and the distant sound of music from the levels above all insisted this was real. She finally fell asleep around 4 in the morning, emotionally exhausted and still wearing her clothes. When she woke, it was to complete darkness. For a panicked moment, Victoria thought she'd gone blind, but then she found the lamp beside the bed and clicked it on, flooding the room with warm light. Her phone told her it was 6 in the evening. She'd slept for almost 14 hours. There was a note slipped under her door, written in elegant handwriting on cream-colored paper. Join us in the main hall when you wake. Dress comfortably. R. Victoria showered quickly, grateful that the bathroom had all the supplies she needed, including toiletries that were definitely higher quality than anything she'd owned before. She dressed in dark jeans and a simple black sweater, trying to look professional but not like she was trying too hard, then made her way back through the winding corridors to the main hall. The underground court looked different in what passed for evening down here. More vampires had emerged, dozens of them scattered throughout the space, talking in clusters or lounging on the furniture with the casual grace of apex predators. They all looked up when she entered, and Victoria felt the weight of their attention like pressure on her skin. Raziel was on his throne again, deep in conversation with a male vampire who had white hair pulled back in a ponytail and wore modern clothes, jeans, and a button-down shirt that looked almost casual compared to the king's formal attire. When Raziel saw her, he said something to the other vampire, who nodded and walked away. Victoria, Raziel called out, and his voice carried across the hall despite not being particularly loud. Come here. She walked through the crowd of vampires, very aware of the eyes tracking her movements, the way several of them inhaled deeply as she passed as if scenting her. It took everything she had not to run. Raziel watched her approach with those unsettling red eyes, and when she reached the base of his throne, he stood and descended to her level. Did you sleep well? He asked, and it sounded like a genuine question rather than mere politeness. Eventually, Victoria said. It's strange, sleeping underground. I kept forgetting where I was when I woke up. You'll adjust. He gestured to the vampire he'd been speaking with before, who had circled back and now stood nearby. This is Lucian Corvinus, my second in command, and the vampire who will be teaching you our laws. Lucian, this is Victoria Bennett, our new human liaison. Lucian inclined his head in a gesture that managed to be polite and slightly mocking at the same time. He was younger looking than Raziel, or at least he'd been turned younger, maybe in his early 30s, with a lean build and golden eyes that sparkled with intelligence and amusement. A pleasure, Lucian said, his accent British and refined. I have to say, you've caused quite the stir in court. Everyone's talking about the human who rejected the king's mercy and demanded to pay her own debt. I didn't reject it, Victoria protested. I just wanted to do things properly. Same thing in their eyes. Lucian grinned, showing fangs. But I like you already. Anyone who can surprise Raziel is worth knowing. I wasn't surprised, Raziel said, though there was a faint note of amusement in his voice. Merely intrigued. The way he said that word, looking directly at Victoria, made her heartbeat quicken. She told herself it was fear, but she wasn't entirely convinced. For the next several hours, Lucian walked Victoria through what he called Vampire Society 101. They moved to a smaller chamber off the main hall, a library that was even more impressive than the one in her quarters, with walls of books stretching up 3 stories and accessed by rolling ladders. There, Lucian explained the complex hierarchy of Vampire Society, the laws that govern their interaction with humans, and the specific rules that applied to working in a vampire court. First and most important, Lucian said, pacing as he talked, never invite a vampire to bite you unless you truly mean it. An invitation, once given, can be difficult to retract, and some of our kind view it as a binding agreement. But Raziel said no one could take my blood without my permission, Victoria said. He did, and that protection is real. But if you give permission even casually, that changes everything. Lucian leaned against one of the bookshelves, his golden eyes serious. Vampires take words very literally, Victoria. We live long enough that language becomes important. A promise made in 1742 is still binding in 2026. So be careful what you say and how you say it. She nodded, filing that information away. What else? Don't go anywhere in the underground without an escort until you know your way around. It's easy to get lost, and there are sections that aren't safe for humans. Don't touch anything that looks old or magical without asking first. Some of our artifacts have protective curses that can be unpleasant. And absolutely, under no circumstances, should you venture into the lower levels below this one. That's where we keep, well, let's call them the more volatile members of our society. Vampires who haven't learned to control themselves around humans. The way he said it made Victoria's skin crawl. You mean like feral vampires? Something like that. Lucian's expression darkened. Not everyone adapts well to immortality. Some lose themselves to bloodlust and have to be contained. Raziel is merciful enough not to kill them, but he can't let them roam free either. They talked for what felt like hours, covering everything from the proper way to address vampire nobility to the specific hand signals Victoria should use if she found herself in danger. Lucian was a good teacher, patient and thorough, but also clearly amused by the whole situation. Can I ask you something? Victoria said during a break in the lesson. Why did Raziel really tear up my contract? Lucian's smile faded, and he studied her with those ancient golden eyes. Honestly, I don't know. I've served Raziel for 200 years, and I've never seen him do anything like that. He's always been fair but rigid when it comes to contracts and debts. It's part of what makes him a good king. People know where they stand with him. Celine thinks he's playing some kind of game, Victoria said. Celine thinks everything is a game, Lucian countered. She's been alive for 6 centuries and spent most of it in vampire politics. But in this case, he hesitated, choosing his words carefully. I think Raziel genuinely felt sympathy for you. Your father's betrayal was particularly egregious, and Raziel has always had strong feelings about honor and family. His own turning was complicated. I think seeing you trapped by someone else's cowardice struck a chord. Before Victoria could ask what he meant about Raziel's turning, the door to the library opened and Celine appeared. The king requests Victoria's presence, she announced, alone. Lucian and Victoria exchanged glances. That's not ominous at all, Victoria muttered, and Lucian laughed. Go on, he said. Raziel's bark is worse than his bite, usually. Victoria followed Celine back through the corridors, but instead of heading to the main hall, they went in a different direction, climbing a set of spiral stairs that led upward. They emerged in what looked like a private study, smaller and more intimate than the grand spaces below, with a desk covered in papers, walls lined with bookshelves and framed maps that showed territories Victoria didn't recognize. There was a fireplace here too, burning with normal orange flames, and standing in front of it was Raziel. He'd changed clothes since earlier, now wearing dark slacks and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. It was the most casual Victoria had seen him, and somehow that made him look even more dangerous, less like a king, and more like a predator pretending to be civilized. Thank you, Celine, Raziel said without turning around. You can go. Celine left, closing the door behind her with a soft click. Victoria stood there awkwardly, not sure if she should speak or wait for him to start. Do I frighten you? Raziel asked suddenly, still not looking at her. The question caught her off guard. Yes, she admitted. You're a vampire, and you're clearly very powerful. Of course you frightened me, but you stood up to me anyway. Twice now." Finally he turned to face her, and there was something searching in his expression. "Why?" Victoria thought about it, trying to find the right words. "Because being afraid isn't a good enough reason to let someone else control my life. My father did that. He let fear and desperation make his choices, and look where it got him. I'd rather face danger on my own terms than live as someone's victim." Raziel studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Your father was a fool," he said, "but perhaps his one wise act was creating a daughter like you." The compliment made Victoria flush, and she looked away. "You didn't bring me here to talk about my father." "No." Raziel moved to his desk and picked up a folder. "I brought you here to begin your actual work. These are contracts and documents related to Elysium's business dealings with human suppliers, vendors, and city officials. I need you to review them, identify any potential issues, and help me navigate the human bureaucracy that frankly bores me to death." He held out the folder, and Victoria took it, flipping through the contents. It was a mixture of licensing agreements, supply contracts, and what looked like correspondence with various city departments. "You have a business degree, correct?" Raziel asked. "I was studying business administration before I had to drop out to take care of my father," Victoria confirmed. "I was in my senior year. Then you should be able to handle this. If you have questions, ask. If you need resources, tell me. And if anyone human or vampire gives you trouble, you come to me immediately." His eyes burned with sudden intensity. "That last part is an order, Victoria. You are under my protection now, and I take that responsibility seriously." There was that possessive tone again, the one that made something in Victoria's stomach twist with an emotion she didn't want to examine too closely. "I understand," she said. They worked together for the next few hours, Raziel explaining the intricacies of running a business that catered to both humans and vampires, Victoria asking questions and making notes. It was strange how normal it felt, just two people collaborating on paperwork, except that one of them was an 800-year-old immortal who occasionally forgot to breathe. At one point, Victoria noticed something odd in one of the contracts. "This supply agreement for your wine cellar. The vendor is charging you almost double the market rate for these vintages. Were you aware of that?" Raziel leaned over to look at the document, and suddenly he was very close to her, close enough that she could smell something like cold stone and winter air on his skin. "I was not," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I leave most of these details to my human accountant." "Are you certain about the pricing?" "Positive. I worked as a server at an upscale restaurant before my father got sick. I memorized wine prices because the tips were better if I could make good recommendations." Victoria pointed to specific line items. "These bottles should cost about 40% less. Someone's either padding their invoice or getting kickbacks." Raziel's expression went cold and dangerous. "Find out which," he said quietly, "and get me the name of whoever approved this contract." Victoria made a note, trying not to think about what would happen to the person responsible. She was working for vampires now. Some things were probably better left unknown. They continued working until Victoria's eyes started to blur from exhaustion. She glanced at her phone and saw it was nearly 3 in the morning. "I should let you rest," Raziel said, noticing her fatigue. "You did well tonight, Victoria. Better than I expected, and my expectations were already high." "Thank you," Victoria said, gathering the folders. "I'll have a full report for you tomorrow evening." "Victoria," Raziel called as she reached the door. She turned back. "You asked me earlier why I tore up your contract. The truth is, I'm not entirely sure myself, but I think I saw something in you that reminded me of who I used to be before I became this." He gestured at himself, at his pale immortal body. Someone who refused to accept fate, who chose honor even when it would have been easier not to. That's rare, in any age. "I wanted to see what you would do with freedom if given the choice, and now?" Victoria asked softly. "Now I'm very curious to see what you'll become," Raziel said, and his smile was the first genuine one she'd seen from him, not mocking or cruel, but real. "Sleep well, Victoria Bennett." As Victoria made her way back to her quarters, her mind was spinning. She'd come here expecting to be treated as a servant or prey, but instead she was being given real responsibility, real respect. Raziel was still dangerous, still inhuman, but he was also more complicated than she'd expected, and the way he looked at her sometimes, with that intense focus, made her feel things she definitely shouldn't be feeling about a vampire king. This was going to be a very long 2 years. The weeks that followed fell into a strange kind of routine. Victoria adapted to the nocturnal schedule, waking at sunset and working late into the morning hours. Her days were filled with paperwork, correspondence, and slowly learning to navigate the complex world of vampire politics. She attended court sessions where Raziel heard petitions and disputes from his subjects, took notes during meetings with other vampire leaders via video conference, and gradually became a fixture in the underground palace. The vampires of the court slowly accepted her presence, though their reactions varied. Some, like Lucian, treated her with friendly respect. Others kept their distance, clearly unsure what to make of a human who worked for the king but wasn't a servant or food source. And a few looked at her with barely concealed hunger that made her very grateful for Raziel's protection. Raziel himself was a constant presence in her new life. They worked together almost every evening, and Victoria found herself looking forward to those hours in his study, where they talked about business and politics, and sometimes, late at night when the work was done, about other things. She learned that he'd been turned during the Ottoman invasions of his homeland, that he'd been a minor nobleman who'd watched his family die and had chosen immortality as a form of revenge. She learned that he loved music, but couldn't play instruments anymore because his strength made it impossible to touch them gently enough. She learned that he was ruthless with enemies, but surprisingly protective of his people, that his court loved and feared him in equal measure, and she learned that despite being a vampire, despite being 8 centuries old, he was still capable of kindness. He noticed when she was tired and sent her to rest before she collapsed. He made sure she had access to human food and sunlight. There was a small courtyard on one of the upper levels where sunlight filtered down during the day, and he'd had it set aside for her use. He never pushed her boundaries, never made her feel unsafe, and slowly, gradually, Victoria found her fear of him transforming into something much more dangerous. It was during her 3rd week in the underground that things shifted. Victoria was reviewing contracts in Raziel's study, as had become their habit, when she noticed something in one of the documents that made her blood run cold. "Raziel," she said slowly, "this contract with the Nightshade Corporation, do you know what they actually do?" He looked up from the map he'd been studying. "They provide security services for several of my properties." "Why?" "Because I recognize this name." Victoria pulled up her laptop and did a quick search, her heart pounding as results populated. Nightshade Corporation is a front company. It's linked to a human organization called the Crimson Order Vampire Hunters. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Raziel was beside her in an instant, moving with that inhuman speed, his eyes scanning her screen. "Are you certain?" His voice was deadly quiet. "Positive. I read about them when I was researching your world, trying to understand what I was getting into. The Crimson Order is one of the oldest hunter organizations, and they're not the kind who discriminate between peaceful vampires and dangerous ones. They want all of you dead." Victoria looked up at him. "Someone in your organization is working with them, Raziel. This contract was signed 6 months ago, which means they've had access to your security systems, your schedules, your vulnerabilities." Raziel's expression went absolutely cold, his eyes burning like coals. "Lucian," he called out, and his voice echoed with power. Within seconds, Lucian appeared in the doorway. "My lord, lock down now. No one enters or leaves the underground until I say otherwise. And bring me Matthias, he's the one who manages our security contracts." Lucian's eyes widened, but he simply nodded and disappeared. Raziel turned back to Victoria, and some of the coldness faded from his expression. "You may have just saved lives," he said quietly. "If the hunters have been gathering information for 6 months, they're planning something major, an attack most likely." His hand came up as if to touch her face, then stopped, hovering in the air between them. "Thank you, Victoria." The next hours were chaotic. The vampire named Matthias was brought before Raziel and questioned. It turned out he'd been bribed by human agents of the Crimson Order, promised wealth and protection if he helped them. His fate was swift and brutal, carried out in a lower chamber that Victoria was grateful she didn't have to witness. Meanwhile, Lucian and Celine worked with other vampires to sweep the underground for any security breaches, finding hidden cameras and listening devices throughout the complex. It was nearly dawn when Raziel finally returned to his study where Victoria had been waiting. He looked tired in a way she'd never seen before, a weariness that went beyond the physical. "It's done," he said. "We've secured the complex and sent messages to the other vampire leaders in the city. The Crimson Order will find us much more difficult to attack now." "What will you do to them?" Victoria asked. "What I have to." Raziel moved to the window, not that there was anything to see but stone walls. "The hunters think we're monsters, and perhaps they're right. But we're also people, Victoria. We have societies, families, lives that matter. I won't let them destroy what we've built." Victoria stood and walked over to him. She should have been afraid, should have been horrified by the violence she knew had just occurred. But instead she felt protective of these creatures who'd given her shelter when she had nowhere else to go. "For what it's worth," she said softly, "I don't think you're monsters. Some of you maybe. But not you, Raziel, not Lucian or Celine or most of the vampires I've met here. You're just different." Raziel looked down at her, and something shifted in his expression. "You're the different one," he said. "A human who sees us as people. That's rarer than you know." They stood there for a moment, close enough that Victoria could see the intricate patterns of red and gold in his eyes, could feel the cold air that surrounded him like an aura. She should step back, should maintain professional distance. But she didn't want to. "Raziel," she said, then stopped, not sure what she'd been about to say. "Victoria." He said her name like a prayer, and then his hand was cupping her face, his touch cold but gentle. "I should not want this. You are human, fragile, and in my care. But I find myself thinking of you constantly, watching for you in every room, listening for your heartbeat in the darkness." Victoria's breath caught. "I feel it too. I shouldn't, but I do." "If we do this," Raziel said, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone, "if we acknowledge what is building between us, there's no going back. Vampires love rarely, but when we do, it's absolute, eternal. I would be yours until the stars burn out, Victoria Bennett, and I would expect the same devotion in return." It should have been terrifying. It was definitely too much, too fast, too intense. But Victoria found herself leaning into his touch, her own hand coming up to cover his. "I'm not afraid," she said, and meant it. Raziel's eyes flared with something primal and hungry, and then he was kissing her. His lips were cold but not unpleasant, and he kissed her with the controlled intensity of someone who was holding back enormous power. Victoria melted into him, her arms coming up around his neck, and for a moment, nothing else existed but the two of them. When they finally broke apart, Victoria was breathing hard, and Raziel looked almost human, with color in his cheeks and heat in his eyes. "This complicates things," he said, but he was smiling. "Probably," Victoria agreed, "but I don't care, neither do I." He kissed her again, softer this time, almost reverent. "Stay with me today. Sleep here, where I can protect you. The sun will be up soon." Victoria pointed out, "Won't you need to rest? I sleep in a chamber below this one, where no light can reach. But you can stay in my study in the adjoining room." "Please, Victoria. After tonight's revelations, I won't rest easy unless I know you're safe." How could she say no to that? Victoria nodded, and Raziel showed her to a small bedroom off his study, fitted with blackout curtains and a comfortable bed. He left her with one more kiss, a promise to see her the next evening. And then he was gone, heading down to wherever vampires slept during daylight hours. Victoria lay in the darkness, her mind racing. She'd just kissed a vampire. More than that, she'd just started something with a vampire king. Something that felt far more significant than any relationship she'd had with human men. It should have been impossible, crazy, wrong, but it felt right. She fell asleep with a smile on her face, and for the first time since her father's death, she dreamed of something good. When Victoria woke the next evening, she found a note on the bedside table in Raziel's elegant handwriting. "Had to attend to council business. Meet me in the main hall at sundown. Dress well." Our dress well? Victoria frowned at the note, then hurried back to her quarters to figure out what that meant. She found Celine waiting for her, along with a dress bag hanging on her closet door. "The king sent this for you," Celine said, her expression unreadable. "He thought you might need something appropriate for tonight's event." Victoria unzipped the bag and gasped. Inside was a gown that looked like it cost more than a car, deep midnight blue silk that shimmered when it caught the light, with delicate silver embroidery along the bodice, and a skirt that would flow like water. It was beautiful, elegant, and definitely vampire court fashion. "What's tonight's event?" Victoria asked, running her fingers over the fabric. "The king is announcing your new position to the full court," Celine said. "Everyone who matters in vampire society will be there, not just our household but representatives from other territories as well. It's his way of making your status official and protecting you from anyone who might see you as an easy target." Victoria's stomach clenched. "How many vampires are we talking about?" "At least 200. Celine's expression softened slightly. "Don't worry, Raziel will be with you the entire time, and no one would dare disrespect the king's chosen in his own court." Chosen. The word made Victoria shiver, and not from fear. She spent the next hour getting ready, taking more care with her appearance than she had in months. The dress fit perfectly, hugging her curves before flowing out from her hips. She left her dark hair down, just adding a simple silver clip, and kept her makeup subtle but polished. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. She looked like she belonged in this world of immortals and ancient power. Celine escorted her to the main hall, and Victoria's breath caught when she entered. The space had been transformed, more lights, more decorations, and filled with vampires. They were everywhere, clustered in groups or standing alone, and they were magnificent and terrifying. White hair and pale skin, eyes in every unnatural color, dressed in everything from formal gowns to modern suits to clothing that looked centuries old. And all of them turned to look at her when she entered. Raziel was on his throne, wearing a formal black suit with silver accents that made him look every inch the king he was. When he saw Victoria, something fierce and possessive flashed across his face, and he stood, descending from his throne to meet her. "You're beautiful," he said, loud enough that several nearby vampires could hear, then softer just for her. "Are you ready for this?" "No," Victoria admitted, "but let's do it anyway." Raziel took her hand, a bold gesture in vampire society. Lucian had taught her, since touch was considered intimate, and led her to stand beside his throne. The crowd quieted, every vampire giving them their full attention. "My subjects," Raziel said, and his voice carried through the hall with supernatural clarity. "I've called you here tonight to make an announcement. Victoria Bennett, the human standing beside me, has joined my household as my personal liaison and advisor. She is under my full protection, bound to my service by choice, and any insult or harm done to her will be considered an insult or harm done to me personally." Murmurs ran through the crowd, and Victoria tried not to squirm under the weight of so many predatory gazes. "Furthermore," Raziel continued, and his hand tightened on hers, "I am declaring my intention to court her, in the traditional manner of our people. Victoria Bennett is mine to protect, mine to cherish, and in time, if she will have me, mine to keep for all eternity." The murmurs became gasps. Even Lucian, standing near the throne, looked shocked. Victoria felt her face flush hot. Raziel hadn't warned her he was going to announce this publicly. "That is all," Raziel said calmly, as if he hadn't just dropped a bomb on his court. "You may resume your business." The crowd slowly began to disperse, though Victoria could feel eyes on her from every direction. Raziel led her back to his study, quickly, closing the door behind them with a firmness that suggested he needed privacy. "You could have warned me," Victoria said, her heart still pounding. "I thought this was just about my job. If I'd told you beforehand, would you have agreed?" Raziel asked, and there was something almost vulnerable in his expression. "I don't know," Victoria said honestly. "This is all happening so fast, Raziel. Yesterday we kissed for the first time, and now you're announcing to your entire court that you want to— What? Marry me. Bond with you," Raziel corrected. "It's similar but more permanent. A bonded pair in vampire society is sacred. We would be tied together. Your life extended to match mine, your blood and mine mingled until we're essentially one being in two bodies." He stepped closer. "But that's a long way off if it happens at all. For now, I simply wanted everyone to know that you are precious to me, that you are not to be touched or threatened. After last night's discovery of the Hunter infiltration, I realized how vulnerable you are here. This announcement makes you untouchable, by making me yours." Victoria said, "Yes, no hesitation, no apology. I am a vampire, Victoria. We are possessive creatures by nature. I want you, and I am not subtle about claiming what I want. If that frightens you, if it's too much, tell me now and I will back away. But know that my protection remains regardless. You don't have to accept my courtship to be safe here." Victoria studied his face, this ancient being who had somehow decided she was worth pursuing. It should be insane. It was insane. But she couldn't deny the pull she felt toward him, the way her heart raced when he was near, the sense that something profound was happening between them. "I'm not frightened," she said finally. "Or maybe I am, but not in a bad way. I need you to be patient with me, Raziel. I'm not immortal, I'm not used to your world, and I need time to adjust to what this all means." "I have all the time in the world," Raziel said softly, "and I will wait as long as you need." He kissed her then, slow and deep, and Victoria let herself sink into it. Let herself believe that maybe, impossibly, this could actually work. The next months were a whirlwind of new experiences. Raziel courted her in the traditional vampire manner, which apparently involved elaborate gifts, formal dates in places Victoria had never imagined existed, and a constant, attentive presence that would have been suffocating if it weren't so clearly rooted in genuine affection. He took her to vampire opera houses hidden beneath the city, where performances from centuries past were recreated with perfect detail. He showed her art collections that museums would kill to possess, explained the histories behind paintings and sculptures that predated modern civilization. He introduced her to other vampire leaders via secure video calls, making it clear that she was important to him and therefore deserved their respect. And he continued to work with her, valuing her opinions on business matters and court politics in a way that made Victoria feel genuinely useful. She wasn't just decoration or a pet, she was a partner, and Raziel treated her as such. But it wasn't all perfect. There were moments of tension, times when the fundamental differences between them became impossible to ignore. Like when Victoria witnessed a vampire being punished for breaking court law, and the casual violence of it made her sick. Or when Raziel forgot, in a moment of stress, that she needed to breathe and held her too tightly. Or when she saw him feed for the first time, drinking from a willing human donor, and felt a complicated mix of jealousy and disgust that took days to work through. They argued about it, that last one. Raziel had found her crying in her quarters and demanded to know what was wrong. "I saw you feeding," Victoria said, not bothering to hide her tears. "And I know you have to. I know it's part of what you are. But seeing you with someone else like that, seeing her face while you drank, it meant nothing," Raziel interrupted, kneeling before her. "She was food, Victoria, nothing more. There was no intimacy, no connection, just the transfer of blood that keeps me alive." "It looked intimate," Victoria whispered. "She looked like she was in ecstasy because vampire venom has narcotic properties," Raziel explained patiently. "It makes feeding painless for the donor, even pleasurable, but that's biology, not emotion. You are what I feel emotion for, Victoria. You are what makes my dead heart remember what it was like to beat. I want you to feed from me," Victoria said suddenly, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I know that's probably a terrible idea, but I can't stand the thought of you feeding from anyone else." Raziel's eyes went wide, then narrowed. "No, what? Why not?" "Because feeding from someone you love is different," Raziel said, his voice rough. "It's more intense, more addictive, more dangerous. I could hurt you, Victoria. I could take too much, lose control, and by the time I realized what I was doing, it would be too late. I won't risk you like that." "But you want to," Victoria pressed. "I can see it in your eyes." "Of course I want to," Raziel growled. And suddenly he was gripping her shoulders, his face inches from hers. "I want it more than I've wanted anything in centuries. The thought of tasting you, of having your blood on my tongue, of connecting with you in that primal way, it consumes me. But I am 800 years old, Victoria Bennett, and I have learned to deny myself things that would be harmful. This is one of those." Victoria stared at him, at the raw hunger in his face, the way his fangs had descended without him seeming to notice, and she made a decision. "Then teach me," she said. "Teach me your control, your discipline. Let me understand what it means to be with a vampire, truly be with you without barriers. Please, Raziel." For a long moment he said nothing. Then he exhaled slowly and nodded. "Very well, but we do this carefully, gradually. And the first time I feed from you, it will be a ceremony witnessed by the court, bound by every protection and contract I can devise. Agreed?" "Agreed," Victoria said, and sealed it with a kiss. The preparation for the feeding ceremony took weeks. Raziel consulted with the oldest vampires in his territory, researching rituals and protections that hadn't been used in centuries. Celine helped Victoria understand what would happen, explaining the physical and emotional sensations she would experience. And Lucian made sure every vampire in the court understood that this was sacred, that anyone who disrupted or disrespected the ceremony would face the king's wrath. Finally, on a night when the moon was dark and the city above slept, the ceremony began. The main hall had been transformed into something ancient and powerful. Candles burned everywhere, thousands of them casting flickering shadows. The floor had been inscribed with symbols Victoria didn't recognize, drawn in what she hoped was not blood, and every vampire in Raziel's household stood in a circle around a raised platform where a single chair waited. Victoria wore white, as was traditional for this ritual, a simple dress that left her neck and arms bare. Raziel wore black formal robes that made him look like something from a different era. When he took her hand and led her to the platform, his touch was gentle despite the hunger burning in his eyes. "Are you certain?" he asked one last time, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Once this is done, we will be bound in ways that go beyond words. My blood will recognize yours, will crave it above all others, and you will feel the same pull toward me." "I'm certain," Victoria said. "I want this, Raziel, I want you." He helped her sit in the chair, then knelt before her, his hands resting on her knees. Around them, the vampire court began to chant in a language Victoria didn't understand, something ancient and rolling that made the air vibrate with power. Raziel leaned in, his lips brushing her throat, and Victoria felt her pulse jump. "I will be gentle," he promised. "And if you need me to stop, just say the word." Then his fangs pierced her skin, and Victoria gasped at the sensation. It didn't hurt, instead, it felt like electricity and warmth spreading from the puncture wounds, like champagne bubbles in her bloodstream. She felt Raziel drinking, felt the pull of blood leaving her body, and incredibly, impossibly, it felt good, better than good. It felt like intimacy on a level she'd never experienced, like Raziel was touching her soul. The chanting around them grew louder, more insistent. Raziel's arms came around her, holding her steady as he fed, and Victoria let her head fall back, surrendering to the sensation. She could feel his emotions through the connection, his desperate hunger, his fierce protectiveness, his overwhelming love. It poured into her like light, like warmth, and she understood suddenly why vampire bonds were considered eternal. This was more than physical. More than emotional, it was spiritual. After what felt like both seconds and hours, Raziel pulled back. His mouth was stained red, his eyes glowing like coals, and he looked at her with an expression of such devotion that Victoria felt tears spring to her eyes. "Mine," he said, his voice echoing with power. "By blood and choice, by ritual and law, Victoria Bennett is mine to protect, mine to cherish, mine to love for all eternity." "Yours," Victoria whispered, and the word sealed something between them. Something she felt snap into place like a lock clicking shut. The vampires around them erupted into celebration. But Victoria only had eyes for Raziel. He lifted her from the chair, cradling her against his chest, and carried her from the hall while his court cheered. He took her to his private chambers, deeper in the underground than Victoria had ever been, to a room that was somehow both luxurious and sparse. He laid her on his bed, and she realized with a shock that vampires did have beds, even if they didn't technically need to sleep, and then he was beside her, holding her close. "How do you feel?" he asked, brushing hair back from her face. "Like I'm floating," Victoria admitted. "Like I can feel you inside my head, inside my heart. Is that normal? For a blood bond, yes." Raziel's expression was soft, tender in a way she'd never seen. "You're inside me too, Victoria. Your heartbeat, your emotions, your thoughts, I can sense all of it now. We're connected truly and completely." "I love you," Victoria said, and realized it was absolutely true. Somewhere between the first night he'd torn up her contract and now, she'd fallen completely in love with this vampire king. "I love you," Raziel replied. "I have loved you since the moment you looked me in the eye and told me you wouldn't accept mercy you hadn't earned. You were magnificent then, and you're magnificent now, and I will spend eternity proving myself worthy of you." They stayed there together as the hours passed, talking and touching and simply being together. And when Victoria finally fell asleep, wrapped in Raziel's cold embrace, she felt safer and more content than she'd ever felt in her life. The months following the blood bond were the happiest of Victoria's life. She and Raziel were inseparable, working together during court hours and stealing private moments whenever they could. The bond between them grew stronger, deeper, until Victoria couldn't imagine existing without him. She learned to sense his emotions, his presence, even when they were in different rooms, and he became attuned to her needs in ways that were sometimes overwhelming. He always knew when she was tired, or hungry, or needed reassurance. But their happiness was interrupted by news that reached them through the vampire network. The Crimson Order was planning a major attack, and Raziel's court was one of their primary targets. Lucian brought the intelligence to them during a private meeting in Raziel's study. "We have a source inside their organization," he explained. "They've been gathering weapons and resources for months. Silver ammunition, UV flashbangs, blessed water, everything designed to hurt us. And they're planning to strike during the day, when most of us are vulnerable." "How did they get a source inside our court in the first place?" Victoria asked, her stomach churning. "Through Matthias," Raziel said grimly. "The security contractor we executed. Apparently, he gave them detailed information about our layout and vulnerabilities before we discovered his betrayal. They've been planning this attack based on intelligence that's 6 months old but still dangerous." "When?" Victoria asked. 3 days from now," Lucian said. "During peak daylight hours. They're planning to breach from multiple entry points simultaneously, overwhelm whatever day guards we have, and slaughter everyone in their sleeping chambers." The casual way he said slaughter made Victoria's blood run cold. "There has to be something we can do." "There is," Raziel said, looking at her with an expression she didn't like. "We can evacuate to one of our secondary locations. I have a compound upstate that's even more secure than this place. We can move the entire court there in 2 nights if we work quickly. Or," Victoria said slowly, an idea forming, "we could turn their plan against them." Both vampires looked at her. "Explain," Raziel said. "They're expecting to find sleeping vampires, right? Easy targets locked in their chambers. What if we evacuate everyone except a small strike force that stays awake during the day? They'll breach the compound thinking it's undefended and walk into a trap instead." Lucian's eyes lit up. "That could actually work. We'd need vampires old enough to resist the day's sleep, and we'd need to prepare defenses they won't expect. But it's possible." "No," Raziel said flatly. "It's too dangerous. If something goes wrong, if they bring more forces than we anticipate, we could lose everyone. But if we just run, they'll regroup and attack again," Victoria argued. "Better to end this now on our terms." They argued for hours, Victoria and Lucian advocating for the trap while Raziel resisted, clearly torn between strategic sense and his desire to protect his people. Finally, he agreed to a modified version of Victoria's plan. Most of the court would evacuate to the secure compound, but Raziel and a small force of his strongest vampires would remain behind to face the hunters. "And you're coming with the evacuees," Raziel told Victoria firmly. "I won't have you anywhere near the fighting." "The hell I will," Victoria shot back. "I can help. I'm human, I won't be affected by daylight, and I can operate equipment and weapons that you can't touch during daylight hours." "Absolutely not," Raziel growled, his eyes flashing. "Victoria, you are the most precious thing in my existence. I cannot focus on fighting if I'm worried about protecting you." "Then trust me to protect myself," Victoria said, taking his hands. "I'm not helpless, Raziel, and I'm part of this court now, part of your life. Let me fight for what we've built." They stared at each other, wills clashing until finally Raziel closed his eyes and nodded. "Fine. But you stay behind our defensive lines, you follow Lucian's orders exactly, and if I tell you to run, you run." Agreed, Victoria said, and tried not to think about how terrified she was. The next 2 days were a frenzy of preparation. Celine organized the evacuation, coordinating transportation and security for the 200 vampires who would be leaving. Lucian worked with Raziel to plan defensive positions, setting traps throughout the underground complex. And Victoria studied blueprints and security systems, learning every entrance and exit, every choke point and weak spot. On the night before the attack, Raziel took Victoria aside to a quiet corner of his chambers. "If something happens to me tomorrow," he said, his voice rough, "if the hunters succeed in killing me—" "Don't," Victoria interrupted. "Don't talk like that. Listen to me," Raziel insisted, gripping her shoulders. "If I die, the blood bond will hurt you. It won't kill you, you're still human enough that you'll survive, but it will be painful. Lucian will take care of you, get you somewhere safe, and in time the pain will fade." "I don't want it to fade," Victoria said, tears streaming down her face. "I don't want to imagine existing without you, and I don't want to imagine any reality where you're in danger because of me," Raziel replied. "But we live in a violent world, Victoria, and I am a king. I have enemies who would hurt you to hurt me, and I need to know that you'll survive and be happy, even if I can't protect you anymore." Victoria kissed him fiercely, desperately, pouring everything she felt into it. "You're going to survive," she said when they finally broke apart. "We both are, and after this is over I want you to change me." Raziel went very still. "What? Change me? Turn me into a vampire?" Victoria had been thinking about this for weeks, but she'd never said it out loud before. "I don't want to be human anymore, Raziel. I don't want to grow old while you stay the same, don't want to be weak and vulnerable and temporary. I want forever with you." "In every sense of the word, Victoria," Raziel breathed, and there was wonder in his voice. "Are you certain? Turning is permanent and it's not painless. You would die as a human and be reborn as something else. There's no going back." "I'm certain," Victoria said. "After we deal with the hunters, after we've secured our home and our people. Turn me, Raziel, make me yours in every way possible." He kissed her again, softer this time, reverent. "After the battle," he promised. "If we both survive, I will turn you, and we will have eternity together." They made love that night, slow and tender and desperate, two beings holding each other against the darkness. And when Victoria finally fell asleep in Raziel's arms, she dreamed of forever. The attack came exactly when the intelligence had predicted. Noon, when the sun was at its peak and the underground court should have been completely vulnerable. The hunters breached from 3 points simultaneously: the main entrance, a service tunnel, and an old maintenance shaft that Matthias must have told them about. They came in force, 30 humans armed with military-grade weapons modified to kill vampires, moving in coordinated teams that suggested professional training. What they found was not defenseless sleeping vampires, but a prepared defensive force. Raziel had positioned himself and 5 of his oldest, strongest vampires in the main hall, along with Victoria. They'd rigged the entrance with UV lights that could be activated remotely, set up silver-laced barriers, and positioned weapons at key choke points. When the hunters breached, they found themselves fighting an alert, organized force instead of helpless victims. The battle was brutal and chaotic. Victoria, operating from behind a reinforced barrier, controlled the UV lights and security systems, flooding corridors with artificial sunlight when hunters advanced, locking doors to trap them in kill zones. She watched through security cameras as Raziel moved through enemies like a force of nature, impossibly fast and strong even with daylight filtering down through the shafts above. But the hunters were prepared too. They had UV grenades that exploded in bursts of artificial sunlight, driving the vampires back. They had silver bullets that actually hurt immortal flesh. And they had fanaticism, the kind of belief that made them willing to die for their cause. Victoria saw one hunter break through the defensive line, heading straight for her position. She grabbed the handgun Lucian had given her and fired, her hands shaking. The shot went wide, but it slowed the man enough for Lucian to intercept him, tearing out his throat with efficient brutality. "Stay down," Lucian shouted at her, blood on his face, his white hair wild. The battle raged for what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes. Slowly, methodically, the vampires pushed back the hunters, their superior strength and speed overcoming human firepower. But not without cost. Victoria watched two of Raziel's vampires fall to silver bullets, their bodies disintegrating into ash, centuries of life ending in moments. Finally, it was over. The hunters were dead or captured, their attack broken. Victoria emerged from her defensive position on shaking legs, looking at the carnage around her. Blood everywhere, human and vampire both. Bodies sprawled across the beautiful marble floors. The smell of burned flesh and ozone from the UV weapons. And Raziel standing in the center of it all, covered in blood that wasn't his own, his eyes still glowing with battle fury. "Victoria," he said, and his voice was raw. "Are you hurt?" "No," she managed. "I'm okay. Are you?" She didn't get to finish the question because Raziel crossed the distance between them in a blur and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "I thought I was going to lose you," he said into her hair. "When that hunter broke through, when I saw him heading for you, I thought—" "I'm okay," Victoria repeated, holding him just as tightly. "We're both okay." They stood there together, survivors of a battle that could have destroyed everything. And Victoria felt the blood bond between them pulse with shared relief and love. The aftermath of the attack took weeks to clean up. They had to dispose of bodies, repair damage to the underground complex, and send messages to the human authorities in the city who were secretly aware of vampire existence, making sure the Crimson Order's attack was officially labeled as a terrorist incident unrelated to vampires. It was exhausting work, but Victoria threw herself into it, grateful to be busy and useful. The two vampires who had died in the attack were mourned in ceremonies that were beautiful and heartbreaking. Victoria learned that vampires might be immortal, but they still understood loss, still grieved for those they'd lived alongside for centuries. Raziel personally spoke at both funerals, his voice steady even though she could feel his sorrow through their bond. 2 weeks after the battle, when things had finally settled into something resembling normalcy, Raziel came to Victoria's quarters late one evening. He was dressed formally in a black suit that made him look like a Gothic prince, and his expression was serious. "It's time," he said simply. "If you still want this, if you're still certain, I'm ready to turn you." Victoria's heart leaped. She'd been waiting for this, thinking about it constantly, but now that the moment was here, she felt a flutter of fear. This was at the end of her human life and the beginning of something else entirely. "I'm certain," she said, standing up. "What do I need to do?" "Come with me," Raziel said, taking her hand. He led her deep into the underground, down corridors Victoria had never explored, to a chamber that took her breath away. It was circular, with a domed ceiling painted like a night sky full of stars. The floor was covered in symbols similar to those from the blood bonding ceremony, and in the center was a bed draped in black silk. "This is where I was turned," Raziel said quietly. 800 years ago in a castle that no longer exists. I've recreated it here as best I can because I believe in honoring the past even as we build the future." He guided Victoria to the bed and she lay down, her heart pounding. Raziel sat beside her, taking her hand. "The process is simple but intense," he explained. "I will drain you to the point of death, yes, actual death. Your heart will stop and then I'll give you my blood. Ancient blood, king's blood, strong enough to transform you. You'll sleep for 3 days while the change takes hold. When you wake, you'll be vampire." "Will it hurt?" Victoria asked. "Yes," Raziel said honestly. "The draining will feel like the blood bond but more intense. The dying will be frightening, and the transformation itself is said to be like burning from the inside out. But I will be with you the entire time, holding you, giving you my strength. You won't be alone, Victoria. I promise." Victoria nodded, squeezing his hand. "I'm ready." Raziel leaned down and kissed her, soft and sweet and full of love. Then his fangs descended, and he struck, burying them in the familiar spot on her throat. The sensation was overwhelming. Victoria felt the pull of blood leaving her body, stronger and more insistent than during the bonding ceremony. She felt her heartbeat slowing, her breathing becoming labored. The world started to gray at the edges, sounds becoming distant and muffled. She was dying, actually dying, and it was terrifying and peaceful at the same time. Just when she thought she couldn't take any more, Raziel pulled back. His wrist was at her mouth, torn open, blood welling up dark and red. "Drink," he commanded, and Victoria obeyed. Vampire blood tasted like copper and ice and something electric she had no words for. It burned going down her throat, and she felt it spreading through her body like wildfire. Her heart, which had nearly stopped, gave one massive beat, then another. Pain exploded through every nerve ending, like her cells were rearranging themselves at a molecular level. Victoria screamed, and Raziel held her, murmuring words in a language she didn't understand, his ancient voice steady and sure. The pain went on, building to a crescendo that made her think she would shatter, and then suddenly it was gone, replaced by a coldness that sank deep into her bones. Her heart beat one final time, then went still. Victoria Bennett died, and 3 days later, she woke up as something else entirely. The first thing she noticed was the silence. Her heart wasn't beating. Her lungs weren't breathing unless she consciously made them do so. The second thing was the clarity. She could see every detail of the chamber, could hear sounds from levels above that should have been impossible to detect. And the third thing was the hunger, a burning thirst that made her throat feel like desert sand. "Easy," a familiar voice said, and Raziel was there helping her sit up. "The hunger is normal. We'll feed you shortly, help you adjust to your new senses." Victoria looked at him with her new eyes and gasped. He was beautiful, he'd always been beautiful. But now she could see the preternatural perfection of him, the way power radiated from his form like heat from a flame. And through their bond, she could feel his emotions perfectly now, no longer filtered through the barrier of humanity. His love for her was like a physical force, warm and constant and absolute. "You're magnificent," Raziel said, touching her face. "Your transformation was perfect. Look." He held up a mirror and Victoria stared at her reflection in shock. Her skin had gone pale, luminous and flawless. Her eyes, which had been brown, were now a deep crimson that matched Raziel's, and her hair, still dark, seemed to shimmer with an unnatural sheen. "I'm really a vampire," she whispered. "You're really a vampire," Raziel confirmed. "My vampire, my queen, if you'll accept the title." Victoria turned to look at him fully. "Queen, you are bonded to a king," Raziel said, and there was something vulnerable in his expression despite his power. "That makes you royalty as well if you choose to accept it. You would rule beside me, Victoria, as my equal and partner in all things. Is that something you want?" Victoria thought about it, about the life she'd left behind, the human world she'd walked away from, the future she'd chosen instead. And she realized she had no regrets. This underground court, these vampires, Raziel himself, this was her family now, her home, her purpose. "Yes," she said. "I want that. I want to be your queen, your partner, your eternal companion. I want forever with you, Raziel." His smile was brighter than she'd ever seen it, and when he kissed her, Victoria felt the bond between them ignite with new intensity. They were matched now, vampire to vampire, king to queen, two immortal beings with eternity stretching out before them. The coronation ceremony was held a week later, once Victoria had adjusted to her new nature and learned to control her hunger and her newfound strength. The entire court attended, along with representatives from other vampire territories across the country, all come to witness the unusual event of a turned human becoming vampire queen. Victoria wore a gown of deep crimson silk that matched her new eyes, with a crown of silver and rubies that Raziel had commissioned specifically for her. She stood beside his throne in the main hall, looking out at the assembled vampires, and felt no fear, only pride and belonging. Raziel took her hand and spoke to the crowd, his voice carrying with supernatural power. "Victoria Bennett came to us as payment for another's debt. She could have been broken by that betrayal, could have become bitter or cruel. Instead, she chose honor, chose strength, chose to pay what was owed on her own terms. She has proven herself worthy of respect, worthy of love, and worthy of immortality. Today I name her queen of this territory, my partner in all things and my eternal mate. Let any who would challenge her standing do so now or forever accept her authority." Silence met his proclamation. Then, one by one, the vampires in the hall knelt, first Lucian, then Celine, then everyone else. A wave of bowed heads and bent knees acknowledging Victoria's new status. "Rise," Victoria said, testing her new authority. "Rise and know that I will serve this court as faithfully as you serve your king. I will protect our people, defend our home, and work to build a future where vampires and humans can coexist peacefully. This I swear by blood and honor and the bond I share with your king." The court erupted into celebration, and Victoria felt the last pieces of her old life fall away. She wasn't Victoria Bennett, struggling human with a dead father and crushing debt. She was Victoria Bennett, vampire queen, eternal partner to Raziel Drăculești, with power and purpose and a love that would last through centuries. Years passed, decades, then centuries. The world above changed, technology advanced, human society evolved, but the underground court remained constant, a pocket of timeless beauty beneath the modern city. Victoria and Raziel ruled together, facing challenges and threats, celebrating victories and mourning losses, always together, always united by the bond that made them one. Victoria learned to use her vampire abilities, discovered she had a talent for strategy and diplomacy that made her invaluable in negotiations with other territories. She maintained connections with the human world, using her unique perspective to bridge the gap between mortal and immortal. And she loved Raziel with an intensity that never faded, that grew deeper and more complex with each passing year. On their 100th anniversary of Victoria's turning, Raziel took her back to the chamber where she'd been transformed. It had been preserved exactly as it was that night, a shrine to the moment there forever began. "Do you have any regrets?" he asked, pulling her close. "Any part of you that wishes you'd chosen differently?" Victoria looked at the vampire king who had torn up her father's contract, who had given her freedom and then given her forever, and smiled. "Not a single one," she said. "You are the best decision I ever made, Raziel Drăculești. My king, my partner, my eternal love." "And you are mine," Raziel replied. "My queen, my salvation, my everything. For as long as stars burn and darkness exists, I am yours." They kissed in the chamber where Victoria's human life had ended and her immortal one had begun. Two ancient beings who had found love in the most unlikely of circumstances. Outside, the city continued its endless rhythm, unaware of the vampire queen who had started as a human with a debt and become something far more magnificent. Victoria's journey had begun with her father's betrayal, with a contract written in blood and a desperate attempt to do what was right. It had led her into a world of danger and darkness, where creatures of nightmare ruled an underground kingdom. But she had faced that darkness with courage and honor, and in doing so, had found something precious, a love that transcended species, mortality, and time itself. The contract her father signed had tried to steal her freedom, but instead it had given her everything. It had brought her to Raziel, to this underground court, to a destiny she never could have imagined. And when Raziel had torn that contract in half, he hadn't just freed her from obligation, he'd opened the door to a future neither of them had expected. One built on choice and love rather than debt and coercion. As Victoria stood in Raziel's embrace, listening to the distant sounds of their court celebrating another night of peace and prosperity, she thought about how strange fate could be, how a terrible situation could transform into something beautiful, how loss could lead to gain, and how sometimes the end of one life was just the beginning of another, better one. She was Victoria Bennett, vampire queen of New York, eternal partner to Raziel Drăculești, and she had forever to look forward to. The debt that had brought her here was long paid, long forgotten, replaced by a bond that was worth more than any amount of money or mortal obligation. And as Raziel whispered words of love in the ancient language of his homeland, as the centuries stretched out before them like a promise, Victoria knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, in the arms of a vampire king who had seen her worth and chosen her to stand beside him for all eternity. The story that had begun with a contract torn in half had become a love story that would last forever, a testament to the power of choice, honor, and the transformative magic of finding your perfect match, even in the most unexpected of places. And though the world would continue to change, though empires would rise and fall and humanity would march ever forward into an uncertain future, Victoria and Raziel would remain constant, two immortal beings bound by blood and love, ruling their underground kingdom with wisdom and strength, forever together in the darkness that had become their home and their sanctuary. Their love story was complete, their ending happy, their future infinite, and in the underground palace beneath the streets of Manhattan, in a world where vampires were real and love could truly last forever, Victoria Bennett had found her happily ever after.